This is your home for St. Cloud State hockey, keeping you up to date on the NCHC.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Pervix!
Women's WCHA.
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies alongside
The National Hockey League.
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill, the thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
And everything from the state of hockey.
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.
Welcome to the Huskies Warming House Podcast Den. The Huskies Warming House podcast is also brought to you by the Soda Pod, home of MNCAA college hockey news and more. Stay wild and up to date with new episodes throughout every week. Find them on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, and other podcast platforms. And welcome into the Huskies Warming House podcast, episode 167 here in the den. And of course, a little bit of a different change to the show as we've always kind of known it, I suppose. If you didn't hear the ad read moments ago, I'll rewind about 30 seconds. And we've got a new partner, so to speak, and a really awesome connection. It shouldn't come as a shock to anybody who really knows us and what we do, Nick, with the Soda Pod coming on board with us and just kind of supporting us a little bit more in what we do. And Nick, you've obviously been at the forefront of MNCAA and that first inception that they kind of went through. For us in the show, and then kind of your background, what does this all mean as far as incorporating the Soda Pod into our daily lives, so to speak, in the podcast world?
You're just trying to get the word of, St. Cloud hockey, both men's and women's, out to more listeners, right, across the greater state of hockey for those who are interested. I know maybe the popular news line about St. Cloud isn't maybe the most positive when it comes to the university, but there were a lot of positive things that happened for both the men's and the women's clubs respectively over the past couple of seasons. So it's always a good high-end program to follow. There's a lot of things that are going right. Some really exciting things on the horizon. So yeah, that's really what it comes down to, is trying to get the word out to the university and to the successes both on and off the ice of these student athletes, the coaches, everybody else in between, to the masses. And that's why essentially this partnership is there. And yeah, like you said, it's been sort of it kind of is an easy marriage per se, just because of some of the things that we've been doing together already for some time.
Yeah, of course, you got Max Veach with Minnesota Duluth, right, and bringing that in. But for us, I mean, our job, obviously, like you mentioned, St. Cloud, but also holistically looking at the NCHC and on the other side of things, the WCHA on the women's side, to kind of bring that all together. As we've talked about changes to the show, we're focusing on St. Cloud, but that also means really conference for the NCHC and WCHA. We're so excited to dive through that and having a new partner to jump in, as well as our old favorite, Center Ice View News and Notes and the Huskies Illustrated platform as well, too, is really exciting to bring all of those together and be a part of this as well. Nick Max and Noah Grant ready to bring you episode 167, and we start with Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View News and Notes. Center Ice View provides you with the best coverage of St. Cloud State Huskies hockey, from game notes, recaps, photos, and more. Go to centericeview.com. Welcome into the show, Nick Max and Noah Grant, episode 167. And as we kind of discussed before, really the bulk of these shows is going to be our women's and men's preview for the college hockey world. But sometimes the stories write themselves here. The last essentially tangent that we're going to pull in from previous shows that's not related to college hockey, we had been covering it. So we figure we might as well get down to the nitty gritty here. The AHL playoffs. And to be honest, Nick, until that overtime victory in game number 3 for the Hershey Bears, you kind of thought Coachella Valley had this one locked up and kind of signed, sealed, and delivered. And the Hershey Bears, moments later, a week later, game 7 overtime, said, not today, 23rd franchise appearance at that level for the Hershey Bears. And what an exciting finish to see that series go the distance. It had 7 games written all over it, took 9 goals against in 2 games for the Hershey Bears to finally wake up. But boy, did they ever.
I'm going to go against you like I normally do, because it certainly wasn't signed, sealed, and delivered. In fact, Coachella Valley against the Milwaukee Admirals in the series prior to that, they also won both at home, lost 3 on the road, then had to come back to Coachella Valley to win that series as well. So at the end of it, the home teams are holding serve in the playoffs. That trend continued here, including in the Calder Cup final. And let's just roll the train, right, of the home teams having the advantage. In Game 7, it was Coachella that was up 2-0 in that hockey game before Hershey would come back and tie it late. And then sudden death overtime, right, Game 7. These are the things that you sort of dream of and play, kind of with, your friends as a young kid on the backyard ponds, right, where you're scoring that winning goal. It is the Hershey Bears that does end up taking the contest. It was a very great series. And, I think if there's anything we can take away from this too, from Coachella, what a season it was, not only because, remember, the first half of the season, they're essentially on the road the entire first third of the season, and then had a pretty heavy home schedule as they welcomed their new building, Acrisure Arena, which is absolutely gorgeous, by the way. Holds about 11,000 people. Got all the way to a Calder Cup final in the first year. Again, former head coach Dan Bilesma, former Stanley Cup winner. Let's adds a little pedigree to that. Just essentially one shot away from winning a Calder Cup title to his name. But that whole area down there in the Coachella Valley, Palm Desert, Palm Springs, really embracing the hockey squad. It helps that you're successful. But, this is an area, now mind you, California just down Highway 15 to San Diego with the Gulls. You had Stockton in the Heat. There's a lot of hockey that was there, but it really had never made itself towards that area, Palm Springs, Palm Desert. Now, very quickly, almost like in Vegas, just to the north, very quickly becoming a hockey hotbed. And shall we say, every seat was sold out. The community engagement was really, really good. But you got to tip your hats to Hershey. Again, former St. Cloud guy, also Zach Fish, homing the microphone, the play-by-play broadcaster, and the director of media relations. Congratulations to him. He got the chance also after the game to go on the ice and also raise the Calder Cup. That was a pretty cool little tidbit. But could have gone either way. And for Hershey, was it their 13th championship, I believe, in their history? Add another wrinkle to their feather in a storied franchise. And let's just say the Washington Capitals prospect pool looking pretty good right now.
Yeah, you look at the Hershey Bears' 23rd appearance of their 4th Calder Cup since becoming the Capitals development team back in 2006. So Mike Vecchione, game winner 16-19 in overtime. How about this? Couple of NCHC connections. Henrik Borgstrom and Ethan Frank recording the assists. Of course, a couple of guys, I believe, Denver and Western Michigan, respectfully, if I'm not mistaken. So.
Yep. And then speaking of, Bulldogs, Hunter Shepard,
that's where I was going.
Calder Cup MVP, and deservedly so. Surprised he hasn't gotten more of a crack at the NHL level. I don't know. Maybe this helps him maybe another opportunity game with Washington, who, shall we say, had some goaltending a carousel over the past year, but nonetheless, another trophy to the trophy case for Hunter Shepard that continues to get probably run out of space up there here. Just I know, Minnesota native himself. Yeah, interestingly enough, Borgstrom and former University of North Dakota product Shane Gersich set to sign with Swedish teams as well too after that particular victory as well too. So something to keep an eye on, obviously, as the NCHC products continue to make noise in the professional hockey world. Speaking of the NCHC, Nick, before we get to our women's preview here, a little story came out last week that talked about Arizona State potentially filling out their petition to bid into the NCHC and becoming the 9th team in conference history. We talked about this on our show about 3 months ago, and we flat out said the travel doesn't make sense. The logistics don't make sense. There's a lot more options for Arizona State in the coming years where it would make sense for them to jump in. Well, apparently, if things are to be believed and things roll accordingly, we was wrong. Very wrong. And let's let's actually, open the envelope of the story a little bit here. This is their second time applying for NCHC membership. So this story goes back a ways. In fact, was it 2017, 2018, I believe, that they first made an official application to join the NCHC. I believe with Mankato, if I serve correct, there were two teams. Both were denied because essentially the league said we're not in a position to expand, right? So under former commissioner, Josh Fetton, who again, fantastic human being, did a great job at his tenure at the helm of the NCHC conference. But it does feel different. It does feel like there is a growing support for this, that there seems to be, shall we say, the teams that are currently here seem to be on board. And I think where you're going with this, Noah, was back a few months ago when there was, it called a leak or whatever it was, right? That it prompted a response, and a pretty strong response from the Miami athletic director about how, with everything we mentioned, travel and logistics, Miami, again, not having, shall we say, the best of history in terms of, wins and losses, essentially pseudo-threatened to pull out of the NCHC if Arizona State joined. I don't know if that still happens yet with this, but this is a very interesting story to follow, because you kind of wonder, now that this has been put out there, it seems like this is becoming more official by the day. We haven't had, at least I haven't heard anything, and maybe Noah, I might check with you, any word from Miami in response, because at least back then that was more speculation, more rumor. Now this seems like this actually has got some traction, it's got some wheels to it, and it seems more likely than not that Arizona State will be bidding to apply for the NCHC. It could be voted on by the Board of Governors sometime this fall, with joining the conference in potentially 1 or 2 years.
Yeah, it's interesting. Haven't really seen anything that is kind of added here. The only thing that I can find is from late April, Miami's hockey future may be in the balance at Naples NCHC meetings. So again, that speculation of the departure from Miami, who, spoiler alert, they are our topic for next week as we start the men's hockey previews and moving into that. Again, not great at keeping a secret, am I? But it's been no secret that Miami has, one, struggled in recent memory as a program, and number two, just kind of went through a plethora of, these hills and valleys that they can't climb out of. And ironically enough, we're talking about Arizona State, but Miami, in some senses, kind of feels at times like the Arizona Coyotes of the NHL, except in the NCHC, as far as some of these things that they're kind of going through here. Not to that extent, obviously, but you kind of get where I'm going here. Haven't heard anything as of recent, but if you're the Redhawks, do you feel a little bit of pressure? Or, for example, if Arizona State does fulfill their bid, they end up coming into the NCHC and finishes like 4th or 5th in the conference, do you kind of start looking around if you're the Redhawks and saying, we were against this, we were against the travel, we were against the logistics, and flat out, they're playing better hockey than us right now? Does it make you feel like you want to kind of pay your way out and move on to a different conference?
It's more complex than that, right, Noah? Because, if they finish 4th, who cares if you finish 1st, right? Let's say Miami has a great turnaround, right? So that makes potentially that point moot. But I think the bigger story here is there another spot, right? And we could go on for days about this, but I think Miami is in a position of wait, right? You're trying to see where this actually goes, right? Do they officially extend an offer for Arizona State? And not only that, another side part about this is, what does that do to the growth of college hockey out west, right? Because remind you, there was a lot of talk about Arizona State potentially being the head man to form a conference out in the western part of the United States, finally get college hockey on the Pacific Coast. If this does come to fruition, that tells me a couple of things. That tells me, one, that Arizona State doesn't feel confident in the short term, and mind you, in corporate world, that's probably 10 years, right? About the prospect of having enough teams / competitive balance to form a conference, right? 2, they feel like, okay, we need to strike iron where it's hot. Arizona State has recruited in the Midwest, and they've done very well there. They also know that to get into an NCAA at-large bid or B1, they got to be in a conference, and 2, they need to play good opponents, which the NCHC provides both of those for them.
Yeah.
So, it's multifactored. And now you bring Miami back into this. So let's just say that Arizona State, now it's 9. We have an odd number, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Doesn't mean that, first of all, it's a numbers game, right? I don't think it's as impactful as people maybe want to say it is. I don't think so. Hold on, because at the end of it, that is a minute part of the bigger issue with Miami, right? It's not just that the hockey team has not been competitive, right? There's financial issues with the university and the hockey team within itself. So you kind of wondered, is that part of the chess piece? And this is one thing we did talk about a few months ago, Noah, was this the chess piece to essentially put a decision on Miami? Could that be the case where if Arizona State is accepted, do we then see a request from Miami to withdraw? Like, we don't know yet. Or does Miami say, hey, maybe we don't want to leave. Maybe this is, buoying up our hockey program by being in the NCHC. We still don't know. And I kind of get the feeling they're being particularly quiet because, again, nothing's set in stone. I do kind of feel like they're waiting to see what actually happens before making their next move.
Well, you mentioned the numbers game. Actually, the real logistical challenge I see is 9 teams, like you mentioned, an odd number. The scheduling gets really interesting. Only 24 games already on the slate. You have 2 teams throughout the season in which you lose 2 games essentially against both of those teams. Then does it become something where like Arizona State, the Colorado teams, and Omaha are playing each other for sure 4 times a year because they're the closest in proximity, and then you reach out for 2 games against the rest of the teams up top? And similar in the Midwest, and similar kind of towards Michigan, Miami. You look at that, or does your non-conference schedule go from having the ability to post 10 games in there to 8? Do things fluctuate? How does the schedule look like too? I mean, there's a lot for the NCHC in general to consider about Arizona State, regardless of money, which, don't kid yourself, the payday is going to have to be big for you to buy your way into the NCHC. I mean, it is a money-driven conference, like a lot of things. And on top of that, where do they fit into the fold as far as scheduling, as far as this and that? Because now you've added a challenge too, where you have to fit another scheduler into the mix. And it also might not jive with certain buildings. For example, Ralph Engelstedt Arena, they don't just do hockey. There's a lot more that goes on there too. So there might be other things that they have to kind of plan for as well too.
I think you're overthinking this quite a bit because, mind you, Big Ten is 7 teams, technically. They're an odd number. You can do 9, right? Remember, in St. Cloud State's schedule, right, you're playing a few teams only once.
It's not about the odd number. It's about the fact that you're growing. 7 teams is different than 9 because you're dropping 2 teams that you have. I mean, that's 8 games, that you don't have to think about, right?
Potentially.
So I'm not sure. I'm not sure what the answer is. The NCHC has an interesting conundrum on their hands.
I don't think it's as complex as you say it is, no, with scheduling, because again, if you look back to this season's past, right, you only play Colorado College once. Maybe that's what you add in Arizona State. 1 year playing them once and it's twice. So maybe you're getting less of these double headers. Like I said, you take away a non-conference schedule. But when you do that, then that also throws in some of the NCAA teams who have been buoyed in years past with their success in the non-conference schedule.
St. Cloud included.
Correct. Right. So I think it's going to come down to, the NCHC will obviously have a proposal of what that scheduling would look like. Because mind you, the Board of Governors meets essentially during the holiday break, right? And if we remember correctly, Noah, they, with Michael Weissman talking to him over multiple years, they set their schedule for the following season during that time. It's already done. So at the end of it, I would think that if this really does have some serious legs to it, and it sounds like it does, right, that there's going to be a written proposal to all of the current members. It's going to talk about what's scheduling, and I'm assuming the formatting would be part of it, whether, you would still have that slot for 10 non-conference or 8 or whatever that looks like. Is there a rotation? Maybe there is a spot where maybe it's a rotating where one season you're not playing one of the other opponents, right?
Right.
Maybe that's part of it. I think the more interesting part here is what happens to the NCHC tournament. Does the 9th team just not make it? Does the first round, does the number 1 team get a bye? Something like that, right? I think that's maybe the more complex part of the equation. But nonetheless, they'll figure it out. They'll vote on it, essentially. It'll either be 9 teams. Heck, maybe there will be 10. Maybe we only know about Arizona State. Maybe there's a 10th one in the fold that isn't getting any press, right? We don't know yet. Or could it be like we mentioned before? Is it a swap? sort of, right? Where it's Arizona State coming in and then Miami says, nope, not doing that. I want out kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the fear with that is, again, Miami, you don't want to be in a spot where you're an independent team, and look where independent teams have gone financially and everything else, right? So unless you have an agreement or some other talks of other conferences, which, mind you, would be a huge breach of contract, it's the grass isn't always greener, right? And I know Miami's had its struggles, but I tend to not agree that the grass is always greener than the other side with Miami leaving the NCHC. I think that's actually more of a risk for them to leave than it would be to stay.
Yeah, two more things here just very quickly. Number one, do you think the NCHC, I don't know if this is protocol or if this is something that they would just do, because of course this is a little bit unprecedented as far as the NCHC is concerned. Do you think that within that proposal they would ask for a yes/no from the other teams to kind of get a feeler as to how they feel? Yeah, okay.
They would have to. I believe they would have to be agreed upon by the majority of the Board of Governors, which, mind you, is essentially a representative from each school of the current schools, I should say, to essentially approve it, because of course there would be that entry fee, which I believe does get split between their other schools, right? So that's part of it. And you also kind of wonder too, Noah, because Arizona State, they're an NHL building, kind of funny. They've got their broadcast ready too, right? So what does that look like in terms of NCHC.TV, right? That's something they've been trying to grow, trying to essentially kind of monetize, right? Because we know it, depending on which school that's at, the broadcasts are maybe a little bit different in terms of how many cameras are operable, the production quality too. Arizona State's going to be, in terms of equipment, for sure, on the same line as, say, St. Cloud State, North Dakota. You do kind of wonder too, with now another team that's going to be essentially broadcast capable, does that also put some money or pressure on some of these other schools to upgrade some of the things that they're doing? Because at the end of the day, Big Ten and Big Ten Plus, all those schools are capable. You kind of wonder for NCHC if they want to be at that same level of that product. Do they have to invest a little bit more? Hey, that entrance fee money could help.
Yeah, certainly could. We're looking at you, St. Cloud State. On top of that, too, wrapping up this topic like we always do, since we were so wrong about it a couple of months ago, we like to ask the question, percentage-wise, Nick, what is? We're not going to nix this conversation until we get your percentage here. What do we think? I mean, what are the real odds of this happening?
I think it's up to 75% now.
Ooh.
I really do feel, just based on the conversations that we're hearing, the information that's out there, that there's some serious traction here. And again, I don't think that Miami being silent in this is a coincidence. I do feel like that is a direct correlation to a lot of these coming out in the media, and essentially College Hockey News, I believe, was the first to really report on this. That's all connected to me. I do feel like, again, for the NCHC, looking at the Big Ten, and for Arizona State, again, they got money, they got stability, they got a brand new gorgeous building that's going to help them grow, again, their online product, NCHC.TV. It makes sense for everybody that's involved. And for Arizona State, that's been looking for a conference for program stability for them without having to build their own, this is a perfect fit.
Yeah, certainly them. Besides the new potential conference out west, the only other one that really seemed to make a whole lot of sense was the Big Ten, right? But they don't really qualify, I believe, for a number of parameters, or maybe they do. I'm not really sure. But I think.
What was the question? Sorry.
If they would qualify for Big Ten, Arizona State, if they would qualify as a Big Ten team, because you have to hit certain parameters to like be a Big Ten program, to be in that conference, first of all.
Every conference has their different bylaws, right? Now, mind you, UCLA / USC is apparently joining the Big Ten too, right? So I don't know what those would require. Because I believe also, because remember, Arizona State was in Big Ten's essentially rotating schedule too for the past couple of years to give them essentially a regular schedule.
Yeah,
right?
and that's kind of where I was thinking. Was that an opportunity explored, or did it not make sense? For example, like here at Minot,
it would have been explored. You just kind of wonder because hockey still is a niche sport in terms of college, right? And especially it's not grouped like football or basketball in terms of conference impact, right? You kind of wonder if with the Big Ten and what the Big Ten is trying to do in terms of shall we say, its brand, I think that's the best way to describe it, that it was more than just hockey for that conversation. Again, I don't know that to be sure. But I would think because Big Ten is the Big Ten, that was probably a hiccup, as I do know for a fact they did explore that, because otherwise, why wouldn't you, right?
Yeah. You mentioned Miami being quiet, though. To be honest with you, I think that's their best play right now, because until you know something definitively, you just don't want to dig yourself into a hole that you have no reason being in until you are at that point, I think. So,
well, it's right. And again, I've maintained this, position for a while now, but I still don't think it's a good idea for Miami to leave. I really don't. I know that they don't like the fact that it's a travel, it's far away, especially for them, because I get it geographically. They're furthest out east, and it definitely doesn't help that their program has been, shall we say, fairly non-competitive in the conference and in the nation for some time now. So everything gets magnified, right? When you're losing, things are magnified, right? I don't think this conversation's even remotely happening if they had been at least up and down, right? They've had some success because they haven't had any. I think this a lot of these little things that I think a lot of teams are like, oh yeah, travel, whatnot. When we asked Brett Larson about it, he said, oh, it's, when they made a trip down a couple of years ago, it's actually kind of fun. It's something different we don't normally get to do, right? It's a different environment. I think from the players and the coaches' perspective, they don't care. In fact, I think it's a great trip down to Mullet. It's a great arena, great spot for hockey. But I just don't see how Miami would think that this is a worst case scenario for them, and more so leaving the conference would actually be better for them. Because to me, if I start hearing about leaving the conference with the way that we know about Miami University, again, and the financial struggles, the hockey struggles, that to me signals more of that hockey program itself is in jeopardy, not the fact they're just leaving the NCHC.
Yeah, you mentioned things being amplified when things aren't going your way and not winning. Well, I think that kind of segues perfectly into our first WCHA women's preview here. The Bemidji State Beavers, we anticipate them to finish 8th in the conference in the WCHA. And, I always think about, of course, this is our third year where we're doing the NCHC previews. Now we've incorporated the WCHA for the first time. And I always think it's difficult because, it's never fun to pick somebody that you anticipate to finish last of the pack. And you don't really want to ever see teams not have success by any means. But I think this is an interesting case because, to be fair, St. Cloud on the women's side was that team, especially when we started covering, women's hockey and St. Cloud. So this is kind of an interesting thing where I think we get a chance to speak a little bit more to what this position might be like and maybe some of the trends that we see here. Bemidji State, of course, coming into last season, did not have the result that they wanted. They finished last in the WCHA last year, only 6 points to their credit behind St. Thomas, who doubled them up with 12. Next closest was Mankato and St. Cloud, respectively, both in the 30s for point totals. So the bottom two teams really struggling in the WCHA. Of course, they're playing at the Sanford Center, same place where the men play. 4,373 is the attendance capacity at the Sanford Center, which is a beautiful building, mind you. It's kind of a nice little intimate building that I really enjoy going to. I wish they had padded seats. I don't know if that's changed since I've been there. It's been 10 years since I've been there, but that's the only change that I would make in that building. But regardless, kind of an overview here, Nick, of last season. It was a season to kind of forget as far as the record is concerned. 5-30-1 on the season, 1-0 in overtime. They were 2-26 in the WCHA. And again, not to point fingers, but go back a couple of years. Does that sound familiar? St. Cloud women's hockey fans? I mean, that's almost identical. 5 of those wins came in the season opening weekend, a sweep against Lindenwood, 3-2 and 6-3. Other than that, their lone wins came in October, late October, a 2-1 victory against Mankato, a 4-1 victory in late November, a non-conference game against Sacred Heart. And then they did get a victory 4-1 in the middle or the early portions of February against St. Thomas. But other than that, it was unfortunately a first round exit at the hands of Ohio State in the WCHA playoffs. Nick, let's kind of start there. This team, did not have the record that they wanted. They tied Clarkson, was the only other result that they were able to fend off a loss. 30 times they were on the wrong end of the scoreboard, 26 of those in conference play. You got a chance to see this Bemidji team in action last season. They're a team that historically, just like their men's program, likes to shut down and play a low-scoring game. When that doesn't happen, they're not as effective. What did you see from this group last season?
Exactly that, right? And Jim Scanlon, head coach there, phenomenal human being, right? Just unbelievable in terms of him as a character coach and whatnot. Got the chance to chat with him a few times. Again, that was the Hockey Day Minnesota game that I got to do for Bally's this past January, which was definitely the highlight of my career so far. Hope to do another one at some point in my career, but you hit it on the head, right? They're a defensive first team. They want to, essentially protect the blue paint. They also want to get into the opponent's blue paint. The issue with Bemidji is they just don't have the caliber on offense, right? A couple of pretty decent players there last year that just not enough depth, right? And like you said, lowest scoring games was their pedigree. And in fact, during the Hockey Day Minnesota, they struck first. It was St. Cloud that actually had to come from behind and score twice to win it 2-1. But that's kind of been their MO, right? Keep it low scoring, keep it tight, try to get a bounce or two. But like you mentioned, a lot of similarities to St. Cloud women's hockey in the past, where a lot of time in their own zone, the offensive chances, not a lot of grade A's, not a lot of, shall we say, sustained offensive zone time. So a lot of one and dones per se, but, great caliber players there, but it's not enough of them, right? And especially in the offensive side. And goaltending this year was also, shall we say, probably not where they'd like them to be. They really do rely on their goaltending quite a bit. And I do feel like last season, that was an area that they felt like probably could have been better. But at the end of it, like you mentioned, just not the best season win-loss record, but a lot of, character people in and out of that locker room. So it's tough to see a season where you struggle, at least on paper that hard. But again, great program, great people.
Yeah, certainly. You talk about leading scorers here. Leading scorer is on her way out, actually, as we speak. Nick, how many players on this team, any idea, finish with double digits in points this season?
One, I believe.
Yeah, just one. So you kind of, and of course, the leading scorer had the tied for the worst plus minus at minus 38, probably one because you're playing so much, obviously. But that kind of gives you an idea here. Well, it's no fun to go through the statistics, but again, as we plan to for every team, we're going to kind of walk through this here. Only 7 times they scored first, which actually is kind of interesting. 3-3-1 when they were able to score first in hockey games. So I mean, if they were able to get out to a good jump, I mean, they were in a hockey game and gave themselves a chance. Of course, 2-27 when they were down on the scoreboard to open the hockey game. When they outshot their opponent, they were about 500, 4-5, and when they were outshot, only a single victory in 26 total contests. 2-3 in 1-goal contests. Only 5 of their games were within a 1-goal margin. But again, when having a lead after 1 or 2 periods, they were mostly successful, but and even tied as well too. They had a couple of wins under their belt, but when they were trailing, when they just got behind, like you mentioned, just hard for that offensive train to get rolling. And Nick outscored by a margin of 154-40. Difficult. In fact, only 8 first period goals all season. So again, kind of gives you an idea of when they're able to tally first, or when, they're able to kind of play a 0-0 game into the middle frame, they're having success. But if they can't get to that point, they just weren't. 1.1 goals per game. So, obviously the offense a little bit starved, as you had kind of alluded to, Nick. But reverting back to the coaching staff here, Jim Scanlon, you mentioned 9th season coming up this year, is the lone coach in program history to hit 100 wins. Just coached his 300th game last season as well. Amatera Sobiek, the assistant coach in her 3rd year, the former captain back in 2018, had 48 points in just under 150 games for Bemidji's program. Also played pro for 2 seasons in Germany, as did the assistant coach, now in her 2nd season, Sarah Bobrowski. Also played pro in Germany in the same league. Also 3 years at Lindenwood for her collegiate career, and 1 at Hamline University, if anyone's paying attention to some Minnesota names and notables, and, former Olympians and things like that. Also former on-ice instructor with the Ottawa Senators youth hockey program for the past couple of years too. So kind of a cool little caveat there. But Jim Scanlon is the name, approaching double digits as far as his tenure there. And he's someone that in the media is not afraid to be frank about his team's performance here. And you got to appreciate that about what he brings to the table. What does Jim Scanlon bring to the table for this Beavers program?
He's frank and honest, yeah, but he's also very positive, right? The one thing that he can do is, he can make adjustments in game, right? We saw that with Hockey Day, right, where St. Cloud was really sort of, shall we say, just giving him no room, especially with the areas of the ice. So Bemidji was essentially sort of exposed St. Cloud a bit on the breakouts. So they actually did, get in between the Huskies in terms of, quick and clean breakouts per se. So he has the ability to see the ice. He's a high hockey IQ mind. And he can coach it really, really well. The thing that he, unfortunately lacks is just, again, the depth, right? The one thing with Scanlon that also you'll see is, and going back to being frank, is he's not, shall we say, shy to mix things up mid-game, right? We even saw some line juggling there in Hockey Day, trying to spur some offense. He's kind of like Herb Brooks, right? Whereas if you're hot, you'll play. But if you're not, or you're kind of like, you know what, this isn't my night, he has no problem maybe, sliding it down a little bit, maybe, bringing somebody else up that's maybe, on a heater per se, right? As we like to say on the hockey bench. So he's a good game manager, essentially, is what that means. Is he knows when, who's hot, who's not. He also can look at the strategy on ice as it's occurring and know what the opponent's throwing you, how he can sort of, shall we say, corral it as best as he can. Again, this is a defensive first structure, right? They're very similar to their men, where, and I think it's fair to say this. Bemidji State knows it's never going to attract, I shouldn't say never, but it's hard for them to attract the big offensive type players, right? So they do have to be stingy defensively. And he can get these players to buy into that defensive structure, right? And then using, shall we say, mistakes, and they block shots really well. So it's, it's using, the full eyes of hockey and what you can do, right? It's not just about, these pretty 3-on-2s on the rush. It's not just about the puck off the glass and this and that. It's, hey, it's not always going to be this pretty thing, but if you block a shot, all of a sudden there's a loose puck, you win a battle, we're back the other way. It's kind of being opportunistic is what Bemidji State has been. And for what he's done in 9 years, I think there's a lot he should be applauded for. Again, over 100 wins. And again, off the ice, he's an incredible human being. Him and the women's head coach for St. Cloud, Brian Adelsky, very, very also close. And in fact, Jim Scanlon, I mentioned this during the broadcast, was the first person to call Idalski after North Dakota shuttered its women's program essentially out of nowhere. So those two very, very close. It shows you the character of two people when you get a call from essentially an opposing coach going, hey, man, if there's anything you need, let me know. So you're getting a character human being too that loves and can teach the game of hockey pretty well.
Yeah, certainly. A couple of bodies, of course, leaving this squad as well, too. And really, the top 4 scorers for this program are headed out. Senior Reese Hunt, who we mentioned, had 12 points last season, headed to Duluth. Claire Vekic headed to Mankato. Adriana Vandalise headed to Maine. And then, of course, St. Cloud picking up Ella Onik and Taylor Larson as well. And then junior goaltender Hannah Hoganson is still in the transfer portal, have not heard anything new as far as her. So other seniors of note, Paige Anderson had 6 points in 36 contests last season. She was a forward. And Abby De La Rosa, which I just think that's an awesome name, no matter what you're doing in life, had a point in 36 contests on the back end. They might return for 5th year as well, too. We'll have to see. Currently right now, and we're still early into the summer. So the other challenge too, as we go through these teams, is some of these initial teams, we might not have a whole lot of information on their freshman class, especially on the women's side. So we're going to do our best, but we don't have any information right now. Current roster right now, as it stands, with those transfers on the way out, has 4 sophomores, 5 juniors, 6 seniors, and potentially those 2 5th-year players if they return. That would be 15 to 17 players, about 4 to 5 defensemen, 11 to 12 forwards, and 2 goaltenders. One of the things that's also really cool, by the way, Bemidji State does a really good job with their website. As far as their roster page itself, by the way, they have an audio pronunciation guide on their website. So if you're ever like a broadcaster or trying to figure out how to say somebody's last name, they have a little like ear icon, so to speak, that you can listen to the names of the players. I think that's awesome. I like, from a broadcasting perspective, exactly what you're looking for. Not only can you see the pronunciation, you can hear it too. And I don't know, kind of geeking out on that. But as far as returning players, Nick, since we don't have any notable newcomers, nobody in the transfer portal headed back to Bemidji State. So difficult for them, of course, ending up losing, I believe it is, 6 players that they're going to end up losing in total here, provided that Hannah Hoganson doesn't return in net. Taylor Nelson captaining the team this season, Chloe Lund and Gabby Smith, alternate captains heading into this upcoming year. Of course, voted on by the team. And it's the first time that all 3 have worn a letter in any capacity at the NCAA level. So thank you, Sid Wolf, for compiling that information for us. But where I was going with Hannah Hoganson is sophomore goaltender Abby Thompson. She saw 8 contests last season, and freshman Madison Fauché saw only a single contest last year. And again, like you mentioned with this goaltending group, even Hannah Hoganson, 30 contests for her, had a 401 and an 881 save percentage. Abby Thompson and 844, Fauché and 818. So, yeah, I mean, obviously limiting chances against is the name of the game. We've seen this before in St. Cloud's capacity. If indeed Hoganson doesn't return and Abby Thompson gets the call moving into her junior season, Nick, what is the important message for the aforementioned coaching staff that we just talked about to get these goaltenders ready and really get this group that is probably going to have some freshmen incoming from what it seems like to really buy into that shot blocking mentality and really keeping things towards the perimeter and, first and foremost, taking care of the defensive side of center ice?
Yeah, what's the coaching proverb in defense, right? It's, always being on the defensive side of the puck, right? Sometimes when you're playing, sort of that, I don't want to say a shell defense, when you're protecting the house, right? Which Bemidji State does. That's kind of been their hallmark defensive strategy. It's sometimes with Bemidji, and we see it more exaggerated in St. Cloud because of the Olympic sheet, right? Is you do have to sort of give them some space and time, right? Now, where that bites them a bit, and there's a less that you can do and more that's like, okay, I just got to disrupt, right? Is we know the top half of the WCHA, I'll just very briefly, we know what the talent is on that top 4, right? Ohio State, Minnesota, Wisconsin, respectively, and then Duluth, right, who had a pretty nice season themselves. So it's very important for not just goaltending, but again, everybody in concert on the ice to be able to play their position and to not get out of that sync, right? You and I both know, and I think our listeners do well, played the game, that it takes one person out of position for that whole thing to collapse. And especially when you're starved for offense, especially when maybe your transition game isn't maybe as dynamic as maybe your opponents, it's super important to kind of be just almost like a frustrator, right? Where, we maybe not counterpunch you quite a bit. We're going to take a couple of punches, meaning our knee pads, and we're going to definitely have some bags of ice in our shins after the game. But if we can commit to being in those lanes for the shots, also taking away passing lanes, more importantly, battling in front of our own net, allowing our goaltenders to see the puck, and then also being there to, clean up any rebounds, that can frustrate some of those teams up top, right? We saw that with St. Cloud when they did win against Minnesota this past year, right? St. Cloud's trying to emerge that way. They're learning how to counterpunch. But the majority of that is coming from that defensive frustration and being airtight in their gaps, as well as taking away those shot lanes. So it's super important, especially when you have a young group, that makes it extra challenging because, again, it's a step up to a collegiate level. So you're trying to adjust to maybe a new system, but also you're trying to adjust to a game that's got more skill, it's got more speed. So it's going to be a tall task, I should say, but they can do it, but it's going to take a total team effort, and we'll see what Scanlon can do with what looks to be a pretty young squad coming into this 23-24 season.
Yeah, losing a lot of players that were set to be juniors and high-scoring juniors as well. Leading scorers entering next season for returners, Chloe Lund, the now senior defenseman, and one of the captains, and Genevieve Hendrickson on the forward side entering her junior year, both had 7 points apiece last year. And you mentioned, kind of being that opportunistic team. I go back to really like the 2017 Ottawa Senators, right? That kind of boring style to watch in the Stanley Cup playoffs, but they got it done because they were so defensively sound, moving in front of that defensive structure in front of, I believe it still was Craig Anderson at that time. Yep. Yeah. And really, the one thing that Ottawa had going for them is they had Jean-Gabriel Pajot, by the way, and just a couple of guys that really kind of,
and Eric Carlson.
Yeah. On half a leg, basically, but still. Not too bad, but kind of taking that mentality is it's like it doesn't have to be where you're running gun or getting into a track meet or getting pulled out of position and running around. It's just you might only get 6, 7, 8 rushes a game. Got to make 3 or 4 of them count, right? How can you be productive in those opportunities in that limited capacity? Really, it all starts with the defensive zone. I think if you're being honest, I think Jim Scanlon would look at this and say, you know what, if we're losing games 2-1, 3-2, 3-1, these low scoring games where we're giving good defensive efforts, empty netter at the end of the game, things like that, we're having a chance to press and push back as we enter the second half of the game, enter in, the latter stages of period number 3. I think that's a good building block for this program. You have to be satisfied if you're in hockey games. We talked about the same thing years ago with St. Cloud, is that they had to give themselves a chance in the final 20 minutes to make a game of it. Regardless of the result, they had to give themselves a chance. And I think now that we've seen that program, a couple of high-end offensive talents coming to St. Cloud there, now you start to see that where now you can punch back a little bit and maybe do it a little bit earlier. But you can't do that unless you buy in on the defensive side. That means your offensive forwards have to be willing to kind of eat some pucks a little bit, to stay sound defensively and then work the transitional game. And you have to know when to fight another day. You've been out there 50, 55 seconds, a minute. Sometimes the dump and chase and the line change is the best call too. You don't have to go and be a hero either too. So, for this team, I think it's going to be an interesting ride for them next season. I'm curious to see if they can surpass last season's point total with a group that is so young. We don't know about this freshman class, and we've talked about it before. St. Cloud had the exact same thing where they had a freshman class come in when we were there a couple of years ago. What is it, 4 years ago now? Oh my gosh.
We don't talk about that podcast.
But talking about that in terms of they were the most offensively successful freshman group in program history. They suddenly brought this punch, and you only felt like it was a matter of time until they were finally unable to unlock that potential. Now we're starting to see Pandora's box open up a little bit. That's Bemidji's task for next season. I think a good benchmark, we're going to get into the schedule in just a second, and I'm kind of jumping ahead, I think, a little bit to our final impressions, but I think a good benchmark for them is to surpass last season's point total. Start there, get at least, let's say, 5 wins in the WCHA. Start that train rolling, start that trend, get this young group involved and kind of get them feeling like they can make an impact at the NCAA level. But Nick, let's talk about the schedule here for this program here. They open up their season against guess who? St. Cloud State. They are on the road at St. Cloud October 13th and 14th before taking on Wisconsin, then Duluth, then Ohio State. So a bit of a kind of gauntlet early for this Bemidji State program. Mankato in late November, and then Minnesota to start December before they get St. Thomas right before the holiday break. Duluth, they will travel to Duluth to start January 12th before heading back home to face Minnesota, and then St. Thomas for a 4-game homestand, and then heading on the road to face Ohio State to start February, at home against Wisconsin, and then finishing the season on the road and then at home against Mankato and St. Cloud respectively. So St. Cloud kind of bookends actually Bemidji season, kind of similar to what we've seen in years past. Yeah, a little bit with Duluth on the men's side. Of course, quarterfinals start March 1st for the playoffs here. If you're Bemidji State, and feel free to add any impressions to the schedule if you feel as well too. At the end of the day, what does this program need to do to be successful? We talked about some of the benchmarks that I had kind of mentioned, but in your mind, what are those benchmarks in your thought process, and how do they get there?
One, because again, they're going to be young, right? And that is you got to gel early. Now, the one thing that they do well, and one thing we haven't really talked about, is usually in the past, this has been a very good skating team. They actually have some decent foot speed. So regardless of my voice taking a crap live on air, beyond the skating part of it, or shall I say, the lack of cohesion, right? Because you're going to have a lot of new faces on the squad. As long as you're skating well, there's a lot of things you can create. There's a lot of things you can thwart as long as you're moving your legs, right? The legs feed the wolf. Yes, I said it for you. Sorry.
Thanks. I was waiting in the wings.
I know you were. So, but that's really what it comes down to, right? And that is, you just have to settle in. And you mentioned the gauntlet, right? You sort of have to, instead of looking at it as a gauntlet, you got to go one game at a time, and you got to be just ready for the challenge, right? That's one thing with Idalsk that he did to instill with St. Cloud was you can't be afraid to go up and face Goliath, right? You have to be ready to go to battle and believe that you have a chance to win, right? And I think with Bemidji, that's where you have to start. It starts really mentally, right? Can we go out there and execute our game plan? And can we put a 60-minute effort out there and not get discouraged if we don't get things to go our way or don't get the bounces or, hearsay or whatnot, or if you're St. Cloud, get a jersey tugged. So, but that's where it starts for me, right? Number two, I think you're trying to keep things within a goal, right? I think that's, you mentioned it before, but if you can keep the games tight, right? Even if you're down 1-0, you're down 2-1, 3-2, what have you, one shot is all it takes to tie it, right? If you can give yourself a chance to keep yourselves in the hockey game, you will eventually do the things that'll get that bounce, that you'll create that odd man rush. You'll get that late power play that you'll be able to tie, and who the heck knows, take a lead, right? So just focus on the small things, right? I think it's easy for us, right, on the outside, as you look at a team that hasn't had the best track record, and you say there's so many areas that needs to be fixed. And it's not that isn't true, but you can't fix it all at once, right? You have to start at the basics, start with those small things, play fast, play smart, and keep your shifts short, right? That's really what it comes down to. And then just execute, go out there and do it. And try to play loose, right? I think it's easier said than done, right? Because we've all been there, right? Where you feel like the odds are stacked against you and you're gripping the stick pretty tight. You're maybe overthinking the play instead of letting the game just sort of, play along in your head, right? You're not using your instincts. That's really what it comes down to. And if you're Jim Scanlon, you got to have fun, right? If there's one thing that in my time chatting with him up before that game on Hockey Day was, you could tell he's like, what, it's a game. We got to go out and have fun. If we win, great. That's wonderful. But even if, we're, like I said, not having the best of outings, you got to have fun with it, because when you're having fun, you're usually more successful on the ice. So they got to do those things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think, the commitment to defense and just kind of committing to the system and buying in, regardless of the result. I think that, there's going to be times where this Bemidji team, they're going to get beat. They're going to get beat either on the scoreboard or in a single play or in a single period, whatever it's going to be. Take those lessons and learn from them. We talked about so much about, I think a great example that we can reference back to St. Cloud, Taylor Lind, right? We talked about her in her freshman season where it was like she had these components and she just couldn't put them together, these little flashes of brilliance. And you just kind of thought, if only she could, X, Y, Z, right? Then you started to see her sophomore year. She started to get some confidence, started to get, some puck luck a little bit too, just creating some opportunities with her feet. Then, her junior and senior seasons, when you start to move into those upperclassmen years, then you start to be a factor. Then you start to be a catalyst. Then you start to take those lessons. And not only are you in the lineup for the sake of being in the lineup, now you're driving possession. Now you're driving offensive production. And I think that if you get some of these young players that are coming into the fold for Bemidji, as well as the senior leadership that has decided to obviously stick around and see this thing through and finish what they started here, there's a little bit of fire in the veins, right? To be able to kind of come into the fold and try to rewrite what they had last year and make it better than what they saw last season. So, of course, as we mentioned, and as always, we like to bring this into the previews to close things out. St. Cloud, of course, sees this team 4 times this season at the beginning and end of the regular season for Bemidji State. What do the Huskies have to do to shut down this team and earn 4 victories?
So for St. Cloud, right, this was their game plan against Bemidji last year, right? And that is, you sort of have to handcuff them in their own zone, right? If there's one thing about defending in hockey, hockey fans, hockey players know it's tiring. It eventually wears you out too, and especially on home ice where it's still an Olympic sheet. There's a lot of room to cover. St. Cloud, if you can just possess the puck, get into the dirty areas too. Again, both these teams, they want to protect the area in front of their net, mind you, right? If you can get in there, work your way through those dirty areas, maybe get a screen, get a tip, or even more so, those goaltenders, again, had a propensity to give up rebounds, give up second chances, right? So be around for those second chance opportunities because they were there, right? That's how you beat this team is you limit their breakouts, you slow them down. Again, they do have good foot speed. That's one thing that they still do, despite what their record says, they skate very well as a squad. But if you can limit those legs, force them to defend, you wear them out pretty quick, and then pretty much you can put it on, don't want to say cruise control, but you can definitely, settle into what your game plan is, and then kind of let your offensive guns go from there. That's how you have to do it. Noah Grant, assistant coach Noah Grant. Yeah, right. Am I wrong in any of my in my analysis here?
It's associate coach to you. You kind of alluded to it. Shot volume, shot volume, shot volume. Depending on if Hannah Hoganson returns or if you have a younger goaltender or more inexperienced goaltender, put pucks on net. I think that, one, you're driving possession by keeping them hemmed in their own defensive zone. You're forcing them to play that defensive style that we mentioned. But number two, not being afraid to filter pucks towards the net, crash the crease for rebounds, as you mentioned, just create havoc in front. Historically, and especially as the season has gone along, Bemidji State, especially in that last weekend series, tends to give St. Cloud a little bit of fits. They played their best hockey as they push towards the tail end of the season, which is obviously what you want to do. And Bemidji, no exception to that. So I think that you have to be ready for the opponent. You have to respect your opponent, not walk in saying, oh, they were 8th in the WCHA last year. Oh, they've lost a couple of key players. They're clearly not going to be as good as. It doesn't matter. 60 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, 60 minutes is 60 minutes, and you've got to put it all together if you're St. Cloud playing these Bemidji State Beavers. Nick, anything else you wanted to add related to Bemidji State before we head on out?
No, I mean, again, a lot of question marks again with this squad in terms of what they will look like. Again, a lot of new faces, and then the faces that they did have, some, exiting to other opportunities. So if you're Bemidji, you can look at it as a fresh start, right? It's a new season. It's going to be a lot of new faces, but it's also everybody starts 0-0, right? So everybody has an equal chance. There's an opportunity to really gel with this group and really buy into to Jim Scanlon's system. So it's not all for all, but there's definitely going to be growing pains, I think, that we expect with this squad, being that there are so many new faces. We saw this with St. Thomas on the men's side this past year, right? 19 new faces. Had a really good second half, though, because they started to figure it out, right? And shall I say, they could have finished higher, because there were definitely times towards the end of November and in December where they lost some close ones that they felt like they could have won, right? Because they held leads and then, maybe gave up a power play here or there. So it's an exciting look at, again, Bemidji State, a storied program here in Minnesota college hockey, and can't wait for, was it September/October for it to start? So there it is.
Yeah, women's team starts in September on the St. Cloud side. Bemidji State starting in October against the Huskies. I always love teams in green. Wishing Bemidji State the best of luck in everything they do in the WCHA, except, of course, against our St. Cloud State Huskies. The Huskies Warming House podcast is brought to you by the Soda Pod. Stay wild and up to date with all things in the state of hockey, as well as sunriseview.com and Huskies Illustrated, your home for all things St. Cloud hockey, including the latest news and photos of your favorite Huskies. Of course, next week, Nick, we get ready for the men's side of things. In the men's preview, it is the Miami Redhawks and Nick Maxon. He is hosting the main portion of the show. So we're going to find out how that goes.
We're going to find out how much you're going to be dreading that episode, not having control of that. I cannot wait to see sweat bullets.
What are you, Miami, talking about Arizona State? I mean, come on.
That's not a fair comparison.
Yeah, which one holds more of the weight? I'm not really sure.
Let's not talk about the scale or anything like that. So I'm there.
Nonetheless,
I've put on a couple since the summer's gone. So.
Oh wow, you're up to 158. Sorry. Anyway.
Yeah, we're getting there. So
yeah. I like your shirt. Does it come in men's? I don't.
It does come with it's the dollar bill Kirill shirt. So
I have the exact same one actually.
It doesn't come in men's, but it comes at $9 million a year. So there you go.
Yeah, actually, kind of cool to see his recent stuff that he's had going on with his golf charity event. Also, by the way, aforementioned sponsor, sunriseview.com, had a really great article if you're getting anxious for some men's hockey news in the St. Cloud side. New pickup, I believe, a defenseman, only whatever he is, 17, 18 years old. He's 6'7", like 203. Oh my gosh,
he's a small human being.
Yeah, he's like two of Nick. But anyway.
That's not it's not an unfair comparison, unfortunately. But they, but the loss of Bushy, they need size. They do need size in the blue line. So as long as and a long reach too, right? So we'll see what he does, or because again, a lot of defensive prospects there. There's going to be a bit of a logjam at the back end, but we'll save more of that discussion for later down when we preview the men's here.
Yeah. Curious to see the logjam as well for the Miami Redhawks, our subject as we start our men's hockey previews for next week. For Nick Maxon, I'm Noah Grant, and for episode 167, we will see you soon in the den.
One-timer coming, they score! Ripped in! A bomb from Perix!
So Dana Rasmussen fires and she scores! Dana Rasmussen for the Huskies
Dwayne Kaprizov in for a chance to win it! He scores! Kirill the Thrill is for real! Welcome to the NHL, a game winner!
St. Cloud Cathedral is now 42.6 seconds away from wrapping up the school's first ever title.